Hey everyone, welcome back to Deeper Roots. You are not alone. We're told this many times in our lives, and it feels like as we get older, that statement becomes more of a challenge. People grow apart, relationships become strained, but the place that seems to hit the most is in our faith. Feeling alone at church leads to a severe breakdown of the principles that we use to strengthen our faith. Like, isn't that the whole purpose of the church? Why is it so easy to feel alone as a Christian? We had the wonderful opportunity to talk about this topic, so if you want to follow up on this, or you have a new question altogether, we would love to talk about it. You can submit your own questions at www.ibbvn.org/deeperroots. And while you're there, go check out the other episodes that we have and see where else we're streaming. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us here on Deeper Roots. Let's get to the conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to Deeper Roots. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Today we have myself, we have Pastor Luis, we also have Esther here. Today we don't have a question from a listener, so if you would like to submit your own question, you can do so by going to www.ibbvn.org/deeperroots. There you can find the form, you can find where we're streaming the podcast, and you can also find the other episodes that we have that's on the website. You can also just see them on the other platforms as well. Today's topic, well, it's a question. Question is, as a Christian, or as Christians, especially nowadays, why is it so easy to feel alone? Pastor?
All right. Today I'm actually not going to start it. We're going to throw it to Esther because it is a topic she brought up, and I think it's great. So maybe if you could just let us know what was behind your thinking when you asked the question, and also your initial thoughts on the topic.
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot to say about this. First of all, I think there's two groups that I'm thinking of when I thought of this. I was thinking of unbelievers who really struggle with feeling lonely. And, as believers, we understand that, right? But then, the reality is believers also struggle with this. And if we are complete in Christ, then why do we feel lonely? The other thing that came up is, we try to substitute things, even as believers, to make us happy. And, we sometimes think marriage will check that off and we're never going to feel lonely, when we have our partner. And guess what? It happens. People who are around people feel lonely. Believers feel lonely. I also believe there's ebbs and flows in our lives where even older people, not just young people, struggle with this. And I thought it'd be nice to bring this topic because I think we can all go through this. And I think also young people maybe struggle a little bit more. And the question of, if we are believers and we do have faith in the Lord and believe that we are complete in Christ, and why do we struggle with this?
Yeah. I think what we need to start with is just that definition, right? We'll be alone. We're talking about why do we feel lonely, right? And it's different from being alone, right? Alone, you can be alone and not feel lonely, and you can feel lonely and be surrounded by people, right? And be in a crowded in a room. So those are two very different things. So maybe we could define it this way, where being alone is actually a physical thing, where we either have or don't have people around us, right? That's being alone. And feeling lonely is more of a state of mind, right? Of a state of mind where you feel lonely. And that's why it can exist even though you're surrounded by people. So you mentioned that why is it as Christians, right? If
we are complete in Christ, then why do we struggle still with this?
Okay. That's a good start to the discussion. Brother Derek, you want to contribute anything before we get into that? Why do we struggle, is your question, if we're Christians, with loneliness, if we're supposed to be complete in Christ?
I just want to start off with fact that this question actually hits me a lot. I think it's so easy to feel alone, to feel lonely in the faith. Like, even though I'm surrounded by a whole bunch of people in church, I'm surrounded by people who always like greet me, say hello. It feels like there's not a lot of people who are actually going to take the time to be around me, to sacrifice themselves and allow me to sacrifice myself for other people, for me for them and them for me. And it's easy for me to believe that there isn't anyone else in the church who is going to accept me for who I am, a barely Spanish speaking individual who goes to a Spanish church. Like, I can put myself out there as much as I want. I can exercise more time to spend with people, and yet it feels like I don't make any progress with being around people. And I guess like it's difficult because like I've understood that church is supposed to be like one of the main purposes of the church is for the social aspect of it. That way you're around Christians and you are around people to encourage you. And at least for like when I'm around people like in my age group, or I'm around people who I'm trying to open up to, it feels like that those times of me trying don't end up making any, like, coming to any fruition. So I guess that's kind of why it feels like it's so easy to feel alone.
Mm-hmm. So would we all agree with what we first stated, though, that when it comes to being lonely or feeling lonely, it is a state of mind, right? So then the question is, how do we fall into that state of mind of feeling lonely? How much of it is other people? How much of it is our perception of things? How much of it is something I can do about it? How much is something that may be out of my control, right? So when we look into the Bible, what are some examples of feeling lonely? I think it's like, and I think we should find some comfort when we struggle with loneliness, into understanding that it's not something out of like you're weird or you're strange for feeling that way. Something's wrong with you. That great people in the Bible struggle with that, right? David. Let me read something from the writings of David in Psalm 25, verse 16. It says, "Turn yourself to me and have mercy on me, for I am desolate." That's the word for lonely and afflicted, right? He felt many times in his writing, we see how he felt like he was alone and lonely, even though he literally was alone in many times because he was running for his life. But also he felt lonely even though God was still there for him, right? And even though God was there. So David was a great man, and he still struggled with loneliness many times because as humans, and which David was and which we are, we struggle with perspective. We struggle with just seeing the world the way God wants us to see us, and to see ourselves the way God wants us to see us. And it's easy to lose track. So we can't be harsh on someone that struggles with loneliness, because we all have been there in one way or form, and other people too. Who else in the Bible comes to mind when we think about loneliness?
I thought of Elijah.
Elijah, right?
Mm-hmm.
A great man. And I mean, it's like, and for him, it always strikes me because it comes right after a great victory, where it was just like, it was obvious God was there. It was obvious he was not alone. It was obvious that
He just so happened to challenge a bunch of sore losers.
Yeah, a whole bunch of sore losers.
So
He won. And then he's like, no one's left.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm alone and everything. And I love that example, because I think it's important that we need to approach people that are feeling lonely, and not with an axe, not with, oh, why do you feel that way? You're supposed to be a Christian, blah, 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 blah. But instead, like God dealt with Elijah, where he ministered to a need. Sometimes there are other needs that we need to minister to people who are feeling lonely. Sometimes it's not just relationship itself, but sometimes they just need something. In his example, food. Food. Second, he gave him perspective, and see, that's why it's a thing of perspective, where God brought him over there. He says, "Why are you here? Mm-hmm. Why are you here? Have you really are you seeing things really from the right perspective? And then reminds him of the truth, right? Hey, where am I? Because I've heard that story of the wind, and the fire, remember, and the earthquake, and I always sort of struggled what the meaning of that was until I finally studied it further, and I'm like, it all is connected with how Elijah was feeling, because Elijah was feeling lonely, and Elisha was feeling like he was the only one left, and that God was not there anymore, that he had abandoned him. And then the whole point of those three things that he does is to show him, hey, I'm not working in the big things. I'm working in the small background, where he says, where in the still small voice, that's where God was. And that's what the whole point was, to illustrate Elijah. Hey, you don't see what I see. You don't see that I'm still here, that I'm still working, that you're not alone, and that they have reserved, how much was it, 5,000 or 7,000 that had not knelt to Baal. So first of all, loneliness is something we all struggle with, but then let's talk about how much of it is our responsibility to not fall into that state of mind, and how much of it is other people. What do you think, Esther?
Right, I've had this conversation with some young people before, and I do believe there is certain things you're talking about, not duty, but you're responsible for, meaning being at church. That's the one thing. So I think there is things that we need to do that we do have control over physically. Like, you can be at church. I think that's a big one. I also, Romans 12 was in my head about renewing your mind. That's also our responsibility, right? So if I'm at church and I am trying to connect with someone, I only have so much responsibility. I can't make that other person do anything. But if you're doing your part, just to give that example, you leave the rest to the Lord. And I think if I know that God knows your heart and your mind enough for him to be like, you're looking for a friend, you're looking for people to connect, he's going to put those people there. And I think it's really hard nowadays because we're so, and I include myself, we're so into our electronics that makes us so be not people person. It makes it so easy for us to say hello and move on and just pay attention to whatever app we use. That makes us even harder, and it makes it awkward because when it is time for us to socialize, it's a little hard, right? Because you haven't been practicing and you haven't been doing it. So I do think there's the sense of responsibility of the renewing of your mind and letting the Lord obviously work in you, and that's through reading your Bible, that's through spending time with him, that's also you being at church, you physically being in here, also mentally, don't get me wrong, you have to be present, and doing the work when there's fellowship time, you need to, right?
I want to draw something here that I just saw here in the example of Elijah. I think, like you said, there's a duty for us to come to church. Yeah. There's a duty for us to work on the relationship part, because to some it comes more natural than others, based on their personalities, based on other things. I think we are in a very unique era where we are experiencing more loneliness based off of our habits with electronics, and that's proven not just from a Christian point of view, a psychological point of view, that more and more use of social media is making people more lonely, because it separates us from what we were created to do, to have this human interaction. Even though I don't know about you two, but I look forward to coming to this recording because it is a little bit more intimate relationship and talk with you guys and stuff. And we're built for that. If we were doing this through Zoom, it wouldn't be the same thing.
No.
And same thing we felt during the pandemic with church through the internet and Zoom. It just loses the feeling of interaction. But I think also one thing we have to understand, that it's also our duty, before we can deal with our loneliness, we have to make sure that God is our all in all. And I don't know how to phrase that better, but that we have to make sure that others and the relationships we seek with others are not trying to fill something that only God can fill. I'm not trying to minimize the need of relationships. Like I said, I look forward to this time. I look forward to the time with church. I look forward to the time with relation with my family. And those things are important. But we have to make sure that our relationship with God is strong enough and principle enough that even if those things fail, that we're not going to feel like everything's gone. I think relationships are meant to be a complement to the relationship we have with Christ. It's the big cherry on top, not the sundae itself. It needs to be that cherry. And it's interesting because see, when Elijah goes through this, right? Right here in 1 Kings 19, God speaks to him, restores him, gives him perspective. Hey, Elijah, get out of here. You're not supposed to be here. I'm working in behind the scenes, right? He tells him, you're not alone. There's still people that haven't knelt down before Baal. And then exactly after that, here in verse 19, it says, so he departed from there, from where God had this intervention, and found Elisha the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he was with 12. Then Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle on him, and he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, please let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. And he said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? So Elisha turned back from him and took a yoke of oxen and slaughtered them and boiled their flesh, using the oxen equipment, and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and followed Elijah and became a servant. It's interesting how right after this moment, God gives him a companion. You know, God gives him a friend. Not only a friend, but someone that would succeed him after. You know, and it's interesting because maybe that was the moment where he understood, hey, I need to make God my principal thing so that God can then complement that with other relationships. And that's very important for us because as Christians, we become very lax in our relationship with Christ. First of all, we lack in our intimacy with Christ, and that exasperates our loneliness because that's the main reason, the main relationship we have to have right first, so that then God can start pouring into us other relationships. And then, like you said, we come to church, and Brother Derek, thank you for sharing your testimony. Right? It's, we come to church, and sometimes we feel that way, but at least you can only do your part. You can only do your part in saying hi and trying to be a friend to others, you know, and talking about them and approaching those that maybe are in the same situation where they feel like no one's talking to them and stuff like that. And I think we need to be, like someone said, the difference we want to see in the world. We need to be that difference. Or if somebody talks to me, I need to approach someone and go and talk to someone and see how you're doing and stuff like that. And then the other thing too, brother, I would say, as you lead in the church, because you are a youth leader here, I'll tell you one thing. Sometimes leadership is also a little lonely. It's part of what comes.
I've found that out a lot. Yeah.
It's part of that what comes with being a leader. It's there's a loneliness. That's why it's important for you to make good friends of other leaders. And try to have those people that you can just be honest. And I appreciate that about you, Brother Derek, because you've been, of course we're not going to say this on air, but you've been very transparent about things that you're going through with Hermana Esther and me, and that's very good that you have that confianza, that trust to be able to just be honest about what you're going through or what you're feeling, blah, 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 because that's what church is about. And sometimes you're not going to be able to click with everybody, but with those who God provides, you know, nourish those relationships.
Yeah. I do have a follow-up question. And I guess I should have thought of this question before, because this was something that's been burning in my mind for a long time. But am I, as like a God-created human being, capable of having God fill my social needs?
Very good question. Can you, as a...
Because like people like I want to explain. I want to clarify that question, because like people in preaching is people in whenever I'm like in a social gathering, people are always like I'm gonna use the word, even it has a bad connotation, word vomiting, the same thing that they hear all the time, which is like, oh, like God just needs to be everything for you. God, like just like let God like take over your life. Like, okay, I'll do my best, but like there's other things that I feel like I need, like friends, like other like people around me that can actually like make a deeper connection than just like, oh, hi brother, and then we leave. Am I as a human being capable, like physically or mentally, like just absolutely capable of having God fill in all those social needs?
It is not good for man to be alone, the Bible says, right? So yes, so that would answer your question that no, in God's design, God is not meant to fulfill every need, for man was created to be a social being. But he needs to be the principal thing. That doesn't mean the only thing. So your question is, can he meet your social needs? Yes, because there's nothing impossible to God, but that's not his design.
Well, he didn't work it that way.
He didn't work it that way.
It's not impossible for him, but it is impossible for us.
For us, it's not the way he's set things up to work.
You just took it to the other extreme.
Yeah.
Pastor always talks about the horse. Like, this is I'm not saying that this is what you're saying, Derek, but like the extreme of I can like live in the mountains and be with God, and that's gonna be enough, and that's not what it is.
Well, like the people that I've always heard, like what I've said, the word vomit has always been like the people with the white picket fences and living at home and all that kind of stuff. So like it just like it's not the monks on the mountains.
And let's not rush too much to judgment sometimes, because
I'm not trying to rush to judgment. I'm just
for you
saying those things.
And maybe that's what they're saying. You have to, maybe if God hasn't provided. And first of all, I don't want to get into too personal of your example.
Sure.
But in someone in your maybe your realm is struggling with loneliness, that's the first thing you need to make sure that you have that relationship with Christ strong and stuff like that. But also realize that you're not completely alone. Yeah, I mean, you do have people that care about you. You have people that sometimes we don't see that and we don't realize that, and that makes us feel lonely too, because we don't realize the things that God has provided. And maybe it's like I said, and if someone is, for example, seeking a mate, and that's what the whole focus is on, the mate, and God says, hey, you're not lonely just because you don't have a mate. It's not time yet. You have all these other people that do care about you and do care about it and stuff. And like I said, there is something to be said about nourishing relationships, because sometimes we don't nourish them enough, right? We don't, or they're very superficial, right? We only see each other on Fridays or whatever. We need to sometimes go further than that. Obviously, you have a working relationship with us, right? And you might not feel that comfortable texting me, hey pastor, how are you?
Let's go for lunch.
Let's go for lunch, which we should.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
we should.
Yeah.
We should, so that's kind of things that we need to go. But you're maybe talking more on your level with college and career guys.
Mainly, it just it feels like a lot of the time, like I'm trying to find like the social aspect of it. Like I know that I can like be social with other leaders, like I can be social with you and Esther here, but there's like the different needs of like where I need to be social, right? And everybody has those things. It's like
true, brother.
When a parent like tells to their kid, like maybe their teenage kid or something like that, and like the parent wants to like go out and let's go to like Great America or something like that, but then the kid is just like, I don't want to do that. I want to hang out with my friends, like and like I imagine like for a parent, like that must be heartbreaking, because like like am I not good enough anymore? Like no, and that's not the case.
Yeah, it's just
a different need at that point.
I also believe that not just you struggle with this, but your generation struggles. It makes, in my opinion, it makes it all harder, because you guys are all struggling in different ways.
Well, let's expand that. I think that everyone struggles with that at some point.
Absolutely. I think as adults we struggle with it.
Don't call me and my generation out on this.
But I also believe that you're more of a generation that's at a younger age has been online, whereas others have not. So I think there's more. We maybe struggled, our generation, in different ways because of when we were born, and I think that's one of them. I mean, for example, my young ones right now in school struggle a lot with social emotional because of the pandemic, and we don't need to go into it, but that's something they're going to struggle with, all of them, for many years, and it's going to be part of their
And
group.
since loneliness is also a state of mind, I mean, this is a whole other topic for another day, but we can jot it down. How social media affects that too, because when your view of yourself is really negative because people are saying negative things about you or comparing you,
liking everything you post,
and don't have the likes that so and so has, and the pics, or I don't have the looks that someone has, and she's always posting these pictures, and I can't post them because I look ugly or whatever. That affects your sense of how you view yourself and how lonely you feel. And that's maybe for another program, but and like I said, it's when it comes to this issue, first of all, if you're feeling lonely, we understand, we get you. If you're feeling lonely, number one, make sure that your relationship with Christ is good, or else you're going to be building upon sand and not upon the rock when you're talking about relationships. And those relationships that you do have, cherish them, build them off the internet, build them in the natural way that God created, and talking, going out and stuff like that. Build them with those people, and trust the Lord to provide the things you need in due time. And I get what Brother Derek's saying, because for me as a pastor, I lead here, and like I said, you can feel lonely because you wear the pastor's hat, and people's relationship towards you is as a pastor, not as a person. And I get that, because sometimes I need someone that sees me as
who you are,
Luis, and just say, hey, Luis, and that's why right now I'm learning to do that. I have, like, the friend I've been telling you about that I'm trying to encourage him. We met in softball, and he just sees me as Luis. That's all he sees me at. So that's like, it feels good. It feels refreshing that it's like, hey, and that's a friendship I try to maintain, because it does provide a certain psychological need.
And if you are struggling a lot, also reach out and talk to your leaders, because I think it's something that we also need to be aware of. Sometimes in our busyness of leadership and life, sometimes we miss it, and we don't want, honestly, I've always said this, church should be a place where people feel accepted and are treated well. And if you are not, we want to know, because maybe we can't fix everything, but at least we can have a conversation or something, because that's what church should be.
Amen. And to finish off, I'll read this verse, Proverbs 18:24. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. It's not so much about having many friends, it's about having a good friend. And sometimes there'll be 2, sometimes there'll be 3, sometimes there'll be 4, but it's not based on the number. It's about having someone that truly cares, and that's there. So hopefully God provides at least that one person in each one of your lives for those who are listening. We love you, and thank you for listening, Brother Derek.
Thank you. If you want to submit a question, you can go ahead and do so at www.ibbvn.org/deeperroots. We would love to hear your questions, whether it's a follow-up to this one, or maybe it is a completely new question, or it's a follow-up to an older episode that we have. We'd love to hear it. Talking about older episodes, we have more episodes. I think this is like 67, so we have like 66 other episodes for you to listen to, and we would love for you to just go through those, ingest them, and just maybe ask more questions. And you can also see the other places that we're streaming the podcast. We're streaming on Facebook, we're streaming on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. And I think that's all that for the conclusion. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope that you'll join us again next time. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Deeper Roots. If you want to submit a question, follow up on something we talked about on the podcast, or you want to find us online, you can go to our webpage, which is ibbvn.org/deeperroots. Deeper Roots is a ministry of Iglesia Bíblica Baptista Vida Nueva, which is a local church in Castro Valley, California. And you can learn more about us and our church by going to our website, ibbvn.org.